Imagine this for a moment. It's late at night in a packed international terminal in the United States. Your flight has finally landed after 14 long hours in the air. Your legs feel heavy from sitting, your back aches, and your eyes burn from lack of sleep. Right now, all you want is a hot shower, a quiet room, and a few hours of solid rest. Sighs. But before any of that, there's one last hurdle between you and the exit, the immigration line. You shuffle forward with dozens of other travelers, passport in one hand, phone in the other, half awake and replaying the journey in your head. Eventually, your turn comes. You step up to the counter. The officer takes your passport, looks at the screen, and starts asking the usual questions in a calm, practiced voice. Where are you flying in from? How long will you be in the country? What's the purpose of your trip? You answer truthfully, just like countless travelers do every day. Everything feels routine. Then the officer glances at your phone and says something that instantly changes the mood. Please unlock your phone and hand it to me. For a split second, your mind goes blank, because that small rectangle in your hand isn't just a gadget. It holds your digital life, conversations with family, years of photos, old messages you barely remember, private jokes with friends, maybe even work notes and personal documents. You hesitate for a moment, not because you've done anything wrong, but because the request feels deeply intrusive. Still, you don't want any issues, and you don't want to get stuck in the airport all night. So you type your passcode, the screen unlocks, and you slide the phone across the counter. 3 seconds, that's all it took. That's all it. In those 3 seconds, without thinking much about it, you may have taken a step that significantly increases how much of your private life can be seen at a U.S. airport. Not in terms of money, but in terms of personal information and potential immigration consequences. Because in that tiny window, a very small technical detail, something most people never think about, may have just opened access to years of your messages, photos, and data. A few hours later, some travelers will already be at their hotels, starting their trips. Others will be sitting in a quiet secondary inspection room, wondering how a normal arrival turned into a long, serious interview. And often, the difference between those two experiences comes down to details nobody explained to them before they flew. I'm Artur from Borderless Pathways, and in this video, we're going to unpack something that almost never gets clearly explained before people travel to the United States. What immigration officers can look at on your phone at the airport, how the law at the border actually works, and which small mistakes can turn a routine entry into a major immigration issue. Before we dive in, one important note. This video is for general information and education only. It is not legal advice, not immigration advice, and it's not tailored to your individual case. Policies can change, and how they apply depends on your specific situation. Always follow lawful instructions from border officers, and if you have questions about your rights or options, speak with a qualified legal or immigration professional. Every day, thousands of people arrive at U.S. airports with valid visas, accurate documents, and completely normal travel plans. Yet some of them still end up in long secondary inspections, facing canceled visas or being told they can't enter. Not because they're dangerous, but because they misunderstood how border inspections differ from day-to-day life inside the country. Many travelers assume that the same privacy protections they hear about in everyday U.S. law work exactly the same way at an international border. In reality, they don't. Inside the country, strong protections often apply to searches of personal property. You may have heard about rules requiring warrants or probable cause before authorities can look through your belongings, including your phone. In normal domestic situations, those protections can be very powerful. But when you arrive at a border crossing, an airport, a seaport, or a land border, the legal environment changes. Under long-standing legal principles, U.S. Customs and Border officers are given broader authority to inspect people and items entering the country. That includes luggage, documents, and in many cases, electronic devices. They can often carry out these inspections without first obtaining a warrant from a judge. In practice, this means that the expectations of privacy you're used to in daily life do not apply in exactly the same way when you are standing in front of an immigration officer. This is where the first major mistake often happens. Some travelers think the best response to a phone search request is to challenge the officer on legal grounds. They might say, "You're not allowed to look at my phone without a warrant," or "You can't search my device without probable cause." Comments like that may reflect how people understand their rights inside the country, but saying them during a border inspection almost never ends the conversation. More often, it changes the level of scrutiny. From the officer's perspective, a routine check has just become a more complex situation. The usual result is that the traveler is sent to secondary inspection, a separate area where officers take extra time to examine documents, ask more detailed questions, and in some cases look more closely at electronic devices. What could have been a brief interaction can turn into hours of waiting and questioning, largely because the exchange became confrontational. Understanding the border search framework doesn't mean you have no protections. It means the rules are different, and trying to argue constitutional law at the counter usually makes things more difficult, not easier. Once you recognize that, another issue becomes much more important. What happens when you do hand over your phone? Even when travelers cooperate and unlock their devices, a small technical detail can dramatically change what officers are able to see, whether the phone is still connected to the internet at the moment it leaves your hand. Think back to that 3-second moment. You type your code or use facial recognition, the home screen appears, and you give the phone to the officer. It feels automatic. But modern smartphones don't just store information on the device itself. A large part of what we think of as on our phone actually lives in the cloud. Photo galleries that sync with online storage, email apps that constantly pull messages from remote servers, messaging services like WhatsApp that may sync backups or old conversations, documents, notes, and app content stored in cloud accounts. Internal guidelines for basic device checks generally tell officers to focus on data that exists locally on the device. But if your phone is still connected to cellular data or airport Wi-Fi, opening an app can trigger it to fetch additional information from remote servers in real time. An inbox refreshes and fills with older messages. A chat app loads archived conversations. A photo app populates with images that weren't fully stored on the device a moment earlier. From your perspective, it can feel like deeply personal content from years ago suddenly appears out of nowhere. And all of it becomes visible simply because the phone remained online when you handed it over. This is why many experienced travelers follow a simple precaution sometimes referred to as a 3-second rule. If they are asked to unlock a phone, they first take a couple of seconds to switch on airplane mode, which typically disables cellular service and also turns off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth unless you manually turn them back on. That step doesn't erase data. It doesn't give you any right to refuse a lawful search. It simply limits the device to what is already stored on it at that moment, instead of allowing apps to keep pulling in fresh content from cloud accounts while someone else is using the phone. The core idea is not resistance. It's understanding how your own technology behaves in real time during an inspection. Once a device is unlocked and online, modern apps can reveal far more than most people ever intended to show. Now let's talk about the app that appears in these situations more often than almost any other: WhatsApp. A lot of travelers feel safe because they know WhatsApp uses something called end-to-end encryption. You've probably heard the term many times. It sounds like an unbreakable privacy shield. And in one specific way, it is very effective. End-to-end encryption protects messages while they are in transit between devices. When a message is traveling from your phone to your contact's phone, that encryption keeps third parties from easily reading it as it passes through networks and servers. But once the message arrives and appears on your screen, encryption has already done its job. On your device, the message exists in plain, readable text. Anyone physically holding your unlocked phone can read it the same way you do. That means the moment you unlock your phone and hand it to an officer, encryption is no longer the barrier many people imagine it to be. Your messages are right there on the screen, organized into conversations, sometimes stretching back a very long time. And here's another important nuance. In the immigration setting, officers are often not just looking for evidence of serious crime. They are frequently focused on something simpler, whether your stated reason for entering the country matches your real plans. Immigration rules place a lot of weight on intent. If you arrive using a temporary visa, such as a visitor, student, or certain types of work visa, you are expected to follow the conditions tied to that status. For example, a tourist visa allows short-term stays for tourism, visiting family, and similar activities. It does not give you permission to work in the United States without authorization or secretly remain there long term. Because of this, officers sometimes glance through digital conversations for anything that contradicts the explanation the traveler gave at the booth. Imagine someone tells an officer they're staying for 2 weeks to see family and do some sightseeing. But a WhatsApp chat from a few weeks earlier shows them asking a relative, "Can you help me find a job when I get there?" Even if that message was casual, exaggerated, or misunderstood, it can raise questions about whether they intend to follow the rules of their visa. In many cases, the issue isn't about proving a crime. It's about deciding whether the person qualifies to enter under the visa category they're using. That's why phones, full of messages, photos, notes, and plans, can become unexpectedly powerful pieces of evidence at the border. Everyday conversations that never felt important when you sent them can take on much greater significance once they're viewed through an immigration lens. This leads into another area where confusion is extremely common: the difference between the position of a temporary visa holder and that of a lawful permanent resident when dealing with border officers. On the surface, both stand in line, present documents, and answer questions at the same counters. But legally, their situations are very different. Someone entering on a temporary visa, tourist, student, or many worker categories, is asking for permission to enter the country each time they arrive. The burden is largely on them to show that they are admissible and intend to comply with the terms of their visa, because entry in that context is a request and not a guaranteed right. Refusing to cooperate with certain inspection procedures can lead officers to conclude that they cannot verify the person's eligibility. In those situations, they may deny admission and, in some cases, cancel the visa. For visa holders, that makes the interaction at the inspection counter particularly sensitive. A lawful permanent resident, on the other hand, someone with a green card, has already been granted the legal right to live in the United States. When they travel abroad and return, they are generally considered to be coming back to their home rather than asking for entry as a visitor. Because of that status, the government cannot usually deny a returning permanent resident entry solely for declining to unlock a device. However, that does not mean there are no consequences at all. If a permanent resident refuses to provide access to a phone, officers may decide to keep the device for further examination. In some cases, devices can be sent away for detailed analysis, and the traveler may receive a receipt while the device is held temporarily. So while permanent resident status itself isn't automatically lost because of that refusal, the situation can still become complicated and highly inconvenient. This creates a choice that many travelers never expect to face: balancing personal privacy against the very real inspection powers that exist at international borders. Understanding whether you are a visa holder or a permanent resident before you arrive at the airport can make a big difference in how you decide to respond if that moment ever comes. You may also be wondering what actually happens after you hand over your phone. Do officers just glance at it and give it back, or can the search go further? Under current procedures, electronic device inspections generally fall into two broad categories. The first is a basic search. This is what most people imagine when they hear about phone checks. An officer manually looks through the device using the phone's own interface, scrolling through photo galleries, checking recent messages, opening a few apps, or viewing visible files. This kind of review is usually brief and done directly on the device. Because Border Search Authority is broader than many domestic search rules, officers may perform this type of basic review without first demonstrating a specific suspicion about the traveler. It can be random, or simply because the officer decides additional checking is appropriate. The second level is an advanced search, which is far more detailed. In an advanced search, officers connect the phone to specialized forensic software designed to copy and analyze large amounts of data from the device's storage. These tools can sometimes reveal much more information than what appears during a simple manual scroll, such as previously deleted items, fragments of location history, app records, and certain types of system data, depending on the device and software used. Because advanced searches are highly intrusive, internal guidelines usually require a higher standard before an officer resorts to this level. They are generally expected to identify what's called reasonable suspicion, a concrete reason to believe a law may have been violated or there might be a security concern before taking that step. In other words, advanced searches are not supposed to be completely random. Something in the inspection process typically raises a red flag that leads officers to conclude a deeper look is justified. And this is where many travelers unintentionally create problems for themselves, not by committing crimes, but through behavior that accidentally triggers those red flags. One of the main things officers rely on is consistency. When your answers are calm and straightforward, and your explanation matches your documents and your travel plans, the interaction usually stays simple. But when parts of the story don't line up, the situation can escalate quickly. For example, if someone says they are visiting for 2 weeks but arrives with several very large suitcases packed as if for a much longer stay, the officer may start to question whether the stated plans are accurate. That can lead to more questioning and sometimes a deeper search of both luggage and electronic devices. Nervous behavior can also play a role. It is completely normal to feel some anxiety during immigration checks, but extreme signs, shaking hands, constantly changing answers, avoiding basic questions, or giving contradictory explanations can raise concern for officers trained to spot unusual patterns. Another situation that often attracts attention involves travelers who completely reset or wipe their phones just before flying. Some people believe that performing a factory reset the night before departure is the safest strategy because it removes messages and files. From an investigative perspective, though, an almost empty phone can look suspicious rather than reassuring, especially if the traveler otherwise appears to be a regular, frequent smartphone user. A device that looks brand new in the hands of someone who clearly uses technology every day may cause officers to wonder whether data was intentionally erased just before arrival. That suspicion alone can be enough to justify a more advanced examination. Ironically, attempts to hide information can sometimes draw more attention than the original content ever would have. That's why many experienced travelers focus less on trying to erase every digital trace and more on maintaining clear, consistent answers and calm behavior throughout the inspection process. When your story, your documents, and your visible data all point in the same direction, the interaction is more likely to remain routine. In many ways, the most effective protection during a border inspection is not a clever technical trick or a complex legal argument. It's simply presenting yourself exactly as you say you are, someone entering the country for the legitimate purpose described in your documents. By now, it's probably clear that the biggest problems at airports rarely start with something dramatic. They usually start with small misunderstandings, details about technology, behavior, or immigration rules that travelers were never taught before they left home. So it helps to approach border inspections the way you would approach any important process. You prepare before you get there, not while it's already happening. Here's a simple preparation strategy you can consider before your next trip to the United States. First, take a careful look at your digital footprint before you go to the airport. Smartphones hold years of conversations, photos, documents, and notes that were never written with legal review in mind. If you're traveling on a temporary visa, ask yourself one question as you look through messages and emails. Could anything here be misread as a plan to break the rules of my visa? Conversations about job hunting, long-term relocation, or staying indefinitely can create confusion if they appear on your phone during an inspection. The goal is not fear. It's awareness. Second, think about how your apps are configured. Some experienced travelers choose to log out of certain social networks or messaging apps before landing. Logging out doesn't automatically erase data, but it adds an extra step before an app opens, which can limit how easily new information refreshes or loads if someone taps into it. Third, remember the 3-second habit. If an officer asks you to unlock your device, one small action before you pass it over can make a big difference. Briefly enabling airplane mode and turning off wireless connections. That simple step limits the phone to the data currently stored on it, instead of allowing apps to quietly pull in additional information from the cloud while the device is in someone else's hands. It's a small technical detail, but it can significantly change what is immediately visible on the screen. Fourth, understand your legal status before you reach the counter. If you're traveling on a temporary visa, your main job is to demonstrate cooperation and credibility so officers can comfortably confirm your eligibility to enter. If you're a lawful permanent resident returning home, the legal framework and your options are different. Knowing which category you fall into ahead of time helps you make better decisions if you find yourself in a difficult moment. Finally, Maintain composure. Clear, consistent answers, realistic travel plans, and steady behavior can help keep an interaction ordinary rather than escalating into something much more involved. In many inspections, how you present yourself matters just as much as the passport or visa in your hand. The key lesson in all of this is that airport inspections are governed by a specific set of rules that many people never encounter until they are already standing in front of an officer. By that point, the chance to prepare has often passed. Our phones have become extensions of ourselves. They hold our conversations, our memories, our plans, and our unfiltered thoughts, written casually to friends and family. But when you cross an international border, that same device can quickly become a window through which authorities try to understand your intentions. Knowing how these inspections work doesn't mean assuming the worst about every trip. Millions of travelers enter the United States each year without any serious issues. The difference is that informed travelers understand the environment they're entering and take a few simple, lawful steps to protect themselves before the journey even begins. Because when you're standing at that counter after a long flight, exhausted and ready to leave the airport, that is not the moment you want to be learning about device searches, cloud backups, or the fine print of visa categories. Preparation happens earlier. And sometimes, preparation is as small as remembering 3 seconds, the few seconds it takes to adjust one simple setting on your phone before handing it over. Those small choices can determine how much of your digital life becomes visible in that moment. And given how much our phones contain today, those few seconds are worth far more than they seem.